Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a time when the sun was the center of more than just the sky. It ruled the imagination of an entire civilization. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's wander slowly along the Nile, where the sands have a way of swallowing both secrets and complaints about taxes that somehow feel very modern. Ancient Egypt, of course, is famous for its monuments, its gods, and the occasional oddly specific fashion choice, like sandals that looked surprisingly like they might have been designed by someone who had never actually walked anywhere. But beneath the impressive stone, the meticulous hieroglyphs, and the occasional mummy in a remarkably cozy linen wrap, there were technologies. Not the kind of technology that beeps or pings annoyingly, but the kind that makes you whisper to yourself in the dark, wondering if perhaps we've forgotten more than we remember. Now, some people like to say that the Egyptians had help, maybe from beings not quite of this world. Ancient aliens, they suggest, dropped by to advise on pyramid construction, irrigation, and gold-plated cat accessories. It's a comforting story, if only because it lets us avoid imagining actual human ingenuity. But let's pause gently, sip the warm milk of historical reasoning, and consider something simpler. Maybe the Egyptians were just very, very clever. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built around 4,500 years ago, it stands today as both a monument and a subtle reminder that humans can be astonishingly stubborn. The precision alone is enough to lull you into quiet awe. The blocks are so carefully aligned, the base so flat, that even modern engineers squint at the plans and murmur quietly about lost knowledge. And yet there's no compelling reason to assume aliens were involved, just thousands of people working in organized teams, moving millions of limestone blocks with copper tools and some very clever ramps. Imagine that, ramps. Ingenious, simple, slightly exhausting ramps. But beyond the pyramids, the Egyptians had a knack for applied science that is almost soothing in its consistency. They were masterful with water, which makes sense because the Nile has a way of insisting on being respected. Their irrigation systems, including basin and canal techniques, allowed them to farm efficiently and predictably, producing enough grain to feed cities, temples, and occasional festival goers who apparently liked to dress as cats. They understood seasonal flooding in a way that would make modern meteorologists nod and smile quietly. It's the kind of knowledge that doesn't hum or beep, but it hums quietly in the back of your mind, whispering, "We figured this out long ago." And then there's mummification. Now, we could spend a long time discussing the religious significance, but let's just gently marvel at the process itself. Embalming a human body, preserving it for thousands of years, requires both chemical experimentation and a patience that is almost hypnotic to consider. Natron, oils, resins, each carefully applied, each layer intended to prevent decay. The Egyptians were early chemists, experimenting quietly in tombs with a meticulousness that borders on ritual. And yes, sometimes they got a little carried away with the cosmetics, but mostly they were very effective at it. Imagine someone quietly wrapping a relative layer by layer, thinking, "This will last for millennia." It's oddly comforting, really, to see such dedication to permanence in a fleeting world. Let's drift over to another small technological marvel, the use of astronomy. The Egyptians aligned their monuments with stars, with cardinal points, and in some cases with celestial events that occur every several hundred years. They noticed patterns. They measured time with shadow clocks and water clocks. It's a kind of low-energy genius, the type that doesn't require dramatic explosions or dramatic conflicts, just observation, recording, and gentle calculation. You can almost hear an Egyptian priest murmuring to himself as the sun rises, "Yes, exactly there. Perfect. Good enough for another century."
And naturally, all of this was mixed with the occasional bizarre social choice. Pharaohs, as it turns out, had a tendency toward peculiar projects. One ruler decided to build a completely new city, while another insisted on erecting enormous statues of himself, so large that carving them alone would have taken decades. In hindsight, perhaps there was a tiny inefficiency here, but it's hard not to admire the audacity. If nothing else, it reminds us that human vanity has always been comfortably intertwined with technological achievement. Speaking of vanity, we should gently mention hieroglyphs. These were not mere letters or symbols. They were little capsules of power, history, and occasionally confusion. Each sign carried a meaning, but could also carry a mood. A single bird could represent a sound, a word, or a concept. Over time, some scribes developed a flair for decorative excess, adding tiny details that seemed to exist purely for their own satisfaction. Imagine spending hours making sure a tiny leg of a bird curves just so. It's the sort of labor that makes modern deadlines look almost disrespectful by comparison. The Egyptians also had a remarkable knack for metallurgy. They knew how to work copper, gold, and bronze with impressive skill, creating tools, ornaments, and ceremonial weapons. These items weren't just functional. They were carefully balanced, polished, and often inscribed with symbolic meanings. The combination of artistry and utility is calming to consider. Imagine a quiet workshop, a craftsman bending a thin sheet of gold over a form, humming quietly to himself. It's the kind of peaceful expertise that invites you to take a slow, deliberate breath and think, some things truly last. Now, of course, modern conspiracy enthusiasts often suggest that these achievements are somehow too advanced for humans of the time. But if we pause and let ourselves consider the rhythm of daily life in ancient Egypt, the explanation becomes almost sleepy in its simplicity. Generations of people, each teaching the next, each improving incrementally. It's a long, slow accumulation of knowledge, punctuated occasionally by the death of a pharaoh or the whims of a particularly demanding noblewoman. The pace is measured, predictable, human. There's also the matter of medicine, which, though sometimes strange by modern standards, was remarkably pragmatic. Egyptians performed surgeries, set bones, and documented remedies for a wide range of ailments. Some of their treatments sound quaint, herbs, honey, and even crocodile dung, but many were surprisingly effective. Their approach was empirical, cautious, and recorded with an attention to detail that makes one quietly respect their patient observation. And unlike some modern attempts at miracle cures, these methods were slow, deliberate, and didn't require flashy commercials. Let's drift briefly into a more mystical aspect, because of course, humans have always had a touch of the dramatic. The Egyptians combined science and superstition in ways that are almost soothingly meticulous. Amulets, charms, and rituals weren't just decorative, they were practical in a cultural sense. Wearing a protective charm might not have changed the chemistry of infection, but it changed the behavior of the wearer, creating a quiet feedback loop that, in a way, made society function more smoothly. It's the kind of soft, gentle magic that doesn't startle you, but rather settles over you like a warm blanket. And so we see a civilization that, while occasionally indulging in grandiose displays of wealth and power, built systems and techniques that were quietly brilliant. They moved enormous stones without machinery, farmed predictably in a fickle environment, and preserved knowledge and bodies with care. Their achievements invite calm reflection rather than awe-stricken panic, encouraging us to consider what humans can do with patience, cooperation, and a touch of obsessive attention to detail. It's tempting, of course, to add dramatic flourishes about alien visitors or miraculous technologies lost to time. But there's something almost lulling in the reality. Humans, endlessly persistent and oddly creative, capable of remarkable things when given time and purpose. Imagine a sun-warmed limestone block sliding into place, a scribe scratching a hieroglyph into soft clay, a craftsman polishing a gold amulet while the Nile flows quietly nearby. Nothing explodes, nothing shouts. It's all slow, deliberate human effort. And as we let our thoughts drift along the gentle currents of the Nile, it becomes clear that there is a particular beauty in this ordinary brilliance. There is a quiet satisfaction in understanding that the most astonishing technologies of the ancient world often stemmed not from intervention, but from observation, patience, and the occasional minor obsession with symmetry. So as we settle in, eyes heavy and thoughts slowing, let's carry with us the hum of history, the slow, persistent rhythm of a civilization that looked at the world, made sense of it, and quietly transformed it. Ancient Egyptians may not have had smartphones or airplanes, but they had patience, cleverness, and a remarkable capacity for meticulous work that echoes across millennia. Let's linger here for a moment, imagining the slow motion of life along the Nile, the gentle lapping of water, the quiet steps of workers on a massive project, the soft scratching of a scribe's reed against papyrus. In these rhythms there is calm. In these details there is comfort. In their slow, deliberate technologies there is a reminder that time, patience, and human ingenuity are perhaps the most magical forces of all. And now, as our minds float softly in the amber light of an Egyptian sunset, we'll drift gently toward the next oddity in human history, another tale of ambition, strange habits, and the curious lengths to which people go to leave a mark. But for now, let's rest quietly with the knowledge that the ancients, in all their meticulous, sometimes absurd brilliance, managed to make wonders without hurry, without spectacle, and without ever raising their voices above the gentle whisper of the wind through the reeds. The fragile bloodlines and peculiar lives of ancient royals. As we settle further into the soft hum of history, let's leave the Nile behind for a moment and wander into palaces, courts, and quiet chambers where the sun shines less brightly, but intrigue and eccentricity abound. Tonight, we're moving gently into the lives of rulers, people who inherited enormous power, sometimes before they could tie their own sandals properly. These are the monarchs who achieved greatness mostly by accident, or misfortune, or sheer familial insistence. Let's start with the concept of dynastic inbreeding. The idea was simple enough. Keep the bloodline pure, ideally without introducing too many inconvenient new personalities. Naturally, this led to some rather interesting results. Perhaps one of the most famous examples is Ptolemy XIII of Egypt. A boy king, he inherited the throne while still young enough to nap through the majority of state affairs. To keep things pure, he was married to his sister, Cleopatra VII. A logical plan if you suspend modern notions of romance, biology, and personal preference. Their relationship, predictably, produced both political drama and whispered tales of sibling rivalry. It's the kind of situation that makes you quietly grateful for the mundane complexities of modern marriage counseling. Cleopatra herself is often remembered for her charisma, intelligence, and dramatic alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But let's pause, softly, to appreciate a quieter detail. She was part of a family that treated political power almost like a particularly tedious board game. Brothers and sisters marrying each other, half-siblings competing for the throne, sudden betrayals over the location of a single palace. It's all very civilized, in a tense, portly way, with just enough subtle poisonings and arrests to keep everyone mildly awake at night. Moving northward to Europe, we find similar patterns. The Habsburgs of Spain, for example, perfected the art of carefully planned marriages, producing generations of heirs who were, if nothing else, strikingly consistent in appearance. Charles II of Spain was the unfortunate culmination of this dedication to purity. Nicknamed the Bewitched, he had a jawline so pronouncedly odd that modern dentists and anthropologists have spent hours gently shaking their heads over it. Charles II also suffered numerous health problems, including learning difficulties, which were perhaps unsurprisingly the result of generations of intermarriage. Yet he remained king, largely because in this period nobody thought to suggest that being alive and slightly confused disqualified one from ruling. There's something quietly tragic, almost hypnotically sad, about observing these fragile bloodlines. It's not dramatic in the sense of swords and flames. It's the slow accumulation of small genetic quirks, compounded over decades. A child born with a delicate constitution, a slight deformity, a tendency to fall asleep at inconvenient moments, and the court collectively shrugs and says, "Well, there's still the heir, we'll make it work." The result is an ongoing mixture of mild misfortune and absurdity, like a play performed in slow motion. And while some monarchs struggled silently with physical or mental fragility, others occupied themselves with decidedly odd habits. Consider Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Naturally, he loved the sun, but also loved the mirror, the stage, and the utterly unnecessary construction of a massive palace at Versailles. Workers toiled endlessly while he perfected the art of ceremonial entryways, extravagant clothing, and elaborate rituals for waking and sleeping. Nothing happened quickly, nothing happened efficiently, but it looked splendid. And it turns out it's soothing to think that even the most powerful people sometimes simply enjoy making an ordinary task as slow and ornate as possible. Then there was Peter the Great of Russia, a man with a particular fondness for shoes, foreign customs, and massive, mildly humiliating reforms. He wanted his nobles to shave their beards and wear Western clothing, which seems minor until you realize he enforced it personally, strolling through St. Petersburg to ensure compliance. One can imagine the gentle terror of a nobleman carefully removing his beard, thinking, "Well, at least I'm not being executed, yet." Peter's fascination with practical skills, shipbuilding, engineering, plumbing, was remarkable, though he sometimes demonstrated them in ways that unsettled visitors. Still, his obsession with progress reminds us that curiosity and eccentricity can exist comfortably side by side. Let's drift, gently, to childhoods in royal households, which were rarely serene. Princes and princesses were often raised in isolation, tutored endlessly, and subjected to strict rules about diet, posture, and the occasional minor ritual sacrifice of their free time. Mary, Queen of Scots, for instance, spent much of her early life under heavy supervision, moved from household to household, and received instruction in politics, languages, and religion while scarcely allowed to play. It's an odd combination, immense privilege paired with almost endless restriction. Perhaps this explains some of the peculiar decisions she made later in life. Or perhaps she simply inherited the family tendency for dramatic flair. Either way, it's comforting, in a sleepy way, to realize that childhood oddities among the elite are nothing new.
And then there are the petty meltdowns. Royals have historically been prone to them, perhaps because everything is carefully documented and nothing is truly private. Consider Emperor Justinian of Byzantium, who sometimes spent entire days lamenting the inconvenience of his empire's bureaucratic structures. He would decree reforms, become frustrated at minor inefficiencies, and then soothe himself by commissioning yet another lavish church. It's a mild, repetitive cycle, like a particularly slow, opulent game of solitaire. Nothing explodes, nothing shouts, just gentle irritation, slowly acted out over decades. Even more calmingly strange are the dietary quirks. Kings and queens often adhered to bizarre rules about food, sometimes because of superstitions, sometimes because of fashion. One ruler insisted on eating only foods that were red, while another avoided anything that had touched iron. We can imagine the palace kitchens, staffed by dozens of devoted workers, carefully crafting meals that satisfy both the palate and the peculiarities of royal superstition. There's a quiet patience in this, a repetitive rhythm that is almost hypnotic if you think about it long enough. Let's not forget personal hygiene, or the sometimes unusual lack thereof. The English King Charles II reportedly had a fondness for baths, but only occasionally, and usually followed by a very particular fragrance ritual. Meanwhile, some of his contemporaries adhered to the opposite philosophy, convinced that washing too often would upset the balance of humors. Imagine, softly, the slow negotiation between ruler and attendant as the decision of when and how to bathe is debated over hours. It's the kind of subtle human drama that doesn't startle, but invites a gentle, drowsy reflection. Of course, the court was also a place for small-scale disasters that could have enormous consequences. Letters lost, messengers delayed, or a minor insult could ripple through generations. The weight of consequence, combined with the fragility of body and temperament, made royal life precarious in the softest of ways. Each decision, no matter how trivial, carried a whisper of potential calamity, which the courtiers would quietly manage while perhaps rolling their eyes at the predictability of human error. As we drift through these corridors of history, it becomes apparent that royalty, for all its wealth and ceremonial grandeur, is not so different from the rest of humanity. They eat, they sleep, they worry, they fret over appearances, they endure the consequences of family choices. The difference is that their errors and eccentricities are preserved, polished, and catalogued, like rare artifacts in a museum. And we, quietly observing centuries later, can find both amusement and gentle comfort in their small misfortunes. So let's linger for a moment with this thought. Dynasties rise and fall, alliances form and unravel, and yet the pattern is surprisingly predictable. The eccentricities of one generation echo softly in the next. A king obsessed with symmetry produces heirs who frown at minor irregularities. A queen obsessed with purity produces children who quietly suffer from inherited fragility. And across the centuries, we watch, slow-eyed and contemplative, appreciating the odd, delicate rhythm of human ambition, vanity, and miscalculation. Tonight, As your thoughts drift along these quiet palace halls, remember the gentle absurdity of it all. Royals are not mythical beings, nor are they inherently wiser or more capable than anyone else. They are humans, occasionally brilliant, occasionally fragile, and often quietly ridiculous. Their lives are stories that unfold slowly, without fanfare, punctuated by small decisions, minor meltdowns, and the occasional genius moment. And so, as we settle further into the night, we will carry with us the soft echo of whispered instructions in dimly lit chambers, the faint scent of perfume and candle smoke, and the subtle, steady pulse of dynastic ambition. There is comfort in knowing that even the most exalted humans have spent their days fretting, scheming, and occasionally tripping over their own vanity. It is slow, it is gentle, and it is, in its own peculiar way, reassuring.
Egyptians had a cat obsession that went way beyond cute. Today, people love cats. Ancient Egyptians, however, worshipped them, not symbolically, literally. Bastet, the goddess of home and protection, was often depicted as a cat or lioness, and that seemed to give Egyptians full permission to let their love go a bit too far. Killing a cat, even accidentally, was punishable by death. Households mourned their cats by shaving their eyebrows, a very bold fashion statement that would have been hard to explain to your neighbors. And archaeologists have found entire cat cemeteries, rows upon rows of mummified cats, wrapped neatly and sent to the afterlife with more care than some actual humans received. It's charming in a way, slightly unsettling, but charming. You can almost picture an Egyptian priest trying to conduct the ceremony while 30 sacred cats wander through the temple, knocking over incense burners with divine disregard. We drift onward. Their afterlife beliefs were complicated and slightly bureaucratic. If you think modern paperwork is exhausting, ancient Egyptian afterlife requirements would make you long for the gentle simplicity of tax forms. To reach paradise, you needed spells, protective amulets, passwords, rituals, a heart light enough to pass a divine weight test, and, of course, a body preserved well enough to be recognized by your spirit. Mummification wasn't just preservation, it was preparation for a cosmic exam. You needed your organs stored carefully, your body dried thoroughly, and your tomb filled with food, clothes, furniture, makeup, and, in some cases, you guessed it, cats. The heart was left inside the body because it was believed to contain your mind and soul. The brain, meanwhile, was scooped out and discarded like unused packaging, which feels like a metaphor for something, though we don't have to decide what. Let's drift gently to the next one.
And then there are small obsessions that take surprisingly large amounts of time. Frederick the Great of Prussia, for example, was obsessed with music, writing flute compositions, and insisting on elaborate performances at court. His military campaigns, while serious, were often scheduled around his practice sessions. The combination of musical precision and political responsibility produces a slow, repetitive rhythm that is oddly calming to consider. Soldiers march, musicians play, and the king inspects both with the same meticulous attention. It's the human penchant for order applied gently, predictably, across multiple domains. Even minor frustrations could become entire projects. In Japan, Emperor Go-Mizunoo had a fascination with gardens. Entire sections of Kyoto were reshaped under his direction. Water features realigned, rocks repositioned, trees transplanted. Each modification was deliberate, slow, and repetitive. One can imagine courtiers silently following him with a rake or measuring stick, adjusting stones while murmuring internally, "Yes, Your Majesty, another rock, precisely so." It's the sort of domestic ritual that unfolds without drama, but with endless hypnotic persistence. And then, of course, there are the less than glorious failures of personal judgment. Napoleon Bonaparte, for instance, was brilliant at strategy, but less so at personal relationships. His obsession with precision extended to his appearance, wardrobe, and table settings, yet he could miscalculate weather, terrain, or alliances with mild, persistent consequence. The contrast between meticulous personal habits and the chaos of broader reality is quietly a reminder that even genius has its slow, gentle limits. As we drift through these centuries of oddities, it's worth pausing over a subtle pattern: the persistence of human foibles. Monarchs, emperors, and kings may have commanded vast armies, controlled immense wealth, and inspired awe in millions, but they also worried, fussed, and sometimes simply tripped over their own habits. Their small, private failures echo with the same gentle rhythm as our own, and observing them invites a peculiar, sleepy empathy. In fact, the more we consider these histories, the more we notice that ambition and eccentricity often coexist in soothing proportion. A king may demand absolute order while dressing in flamboyant robes. A queen may command respect while refusing to eat anything that is not perfectly symmetrical. A prince may inherit an empire while napping through most of the morning. All of it unfolds slowly, methodically, and quietly, like a river that never rushes but always continues its course. Even in more extreme cases, the failures are more charming than alarming. Take Emperor Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire, who spent his reign fascinated with astrology, alchemy, and bizarre experiments. His court was full of curious devices, mechanical inventions, and jars of strange substances, some mildly useful, others entirely ornamental. Advisors tolerated his obsessions with a quiet patience born of years of observation. There's a hypnotic charm in the notion that an entire empire functioned while the emperor quietly pondered the properties of gold and stars. And so we drift gently into reflection. Across continents and centuries, rulers shared patterns of minor obsessions, delicate fragilities, and amusingly misapplied ingenuity. They remind us that even those who seem larger than life are quietly, insistently human. Their eccentricities preserved in diaries, letters, and artwork are gifts to us, allowing for contemplation, empathy, and the soft amusement of seeing history unfold without rush, without clamor, and without unnecessary drama. Tonight, as we let our thoughts glide along the slow currents of dynastic history, we find a rhythm that is oddly comforting. Small failures, peculiar habits, eccentric obsessions, and minor disasters all weave together to form a gentle tapestry of human life. It is a tapestry in which power does not eradicate idiosyncrasy, and where even the most exalted figures are bound by the quiet limits of temperament, circumstance, and curiosity. And as your eyes begin to grow heavy, let the image settle softly. A king tiptoeing across a palace floor to avoid imagined breakage. A queen arranging her utensils with precise care. An emperor quietly measuring stones in a garden. A prince napping through a council meeting. The grandeur of history is not always in wars or revolutions. Sometimes it is in the slow, persistent, and oddly comforting rhythm of human peculiarities, quietly preserved across time.
Odd inventions, bizarre traditions, and gentle misadventures of history's elites. As we wander further along the soft corridors of history, let's linger over the smaller, quieter eccentricities that make monarchs and rulers feel almost relatable. It's easy to imagine kings and queens as figures of overwhelming majesty, but often their lives were full of minor experiments, whimsical decisions, and peculiar traditions that didn't always have grand consequences, but were endlessly fascinating to observe. Take, for instance, the curious inventions of monarchs. Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, whom we visited briefly before, was obsessed with alchemy. His fascination with turning base metals into gold led him to fill entire rooms with jars of powders, liquids, and strange mechanical devices. Advisors tolerated these experiments with a patience that was almost soothing, quietly noting that the empire continued to run despite the occasional explosion of vinegar and mercury. It's the kind of persistent, gentle eccentricity that can lull a listener into calm contemplation. Watching a ruler carefully mix chemicals while an entire bureaucracy hums quietly in the background. Similarly, in England, King Charles II reportedly enjoyed elaborate machinery for amusement. He had devices that could pour wine automatically or operate small fountains, and he delighted in showing them off to guests, often with the mild frustration of servants adjusting levers and pulleys behind the scenes. One can imagine the slow hum of the gears, the gentle splash of water, and the king quietly observing, satisfied with the delicate mechanics of domestic spectacle. It's a kind of quiet entertainment, entirely removed from war or politics, yet oddly reflective of human ingenuity. Now, moving to traditions, many royal customs were bizarrely persistent. In France, the ritual of ceremonial waking was taken very seriously. Courtiers were required to witness the king's rising, note his mood, and even observe the order in which he dressed. Each accessory was carefully positioned, each robe was inspected. It's a soothingly repetitive process when considered from afar, a slow, hypnotic rhythm that must have shaped the very air of the court. Imagine dozens of people standing quietly, waiting, moving in subtle choreography as their monarch slowly comes to consciousness. There's a strange comfort in the predictability of such elaborate rituals. Across Europe, similar practices prevailed. At the Ottoman court, sultans maintained elaborate harems and strict hierarchies, often spending hours in carefully staged interactions with advisors, concubines, and attendants. Protocol dictated behavior, clothing, and even seating arrangements, producing a slow-moving rhythm of courtly life that was rigid, precise, and quietly mesmerizing. Each minor decision, where to sit, which flower to accept, how to respond to a greeting, was recorded meticulously, a gentle testament to the human desire for order amid chaos. And then there are the odd personal hobbies that sometimes dominate royal attention. Frederick the Great of Prussia, for instance, played the flute obsessively, composing music that he would then perform for courtiers and soldiers alike. His dual role as a military strategist and musician is oddly soothing when considered slowly. A man with immense responsibility, yet quietly dedicated to artistic expression. Soldiers march, musicians play, and the king inspects both with a meticulousness that is almost hypnotic in its regularity. Other monarchs took comfort in the domestic, sometimes trivial arts. Catherine the Great, for example, wrote letters and philosophical treatises, corresponding with intellectuals across Europe while simultaneously managing court intrigue and imperial expansion. She spent hours refining her handwriting, selecting appropriate seals, and ensuring the precise tone of her communications. It's the kind of meticulous, repetitive work that feels almost meditative when we imagine it from a distance. Quill scratching against paper, candlelight flickering across carefully stacked parchment, empire quietly continuing in the background. And then there are the minor disasters that accumulate slowly rather than explode dramatically. Small mistakes in etiquette, slight miscalculations in logistics, delayed messages. These produce gentle ripples rather than waves. King Louis XIV, for example, with his endless rituals and precise routines, often saw small administrative errors corrected quietly by advisors, without fanfare, without panic. The Sun King's obsession with ceremony created a slow, steady rhythm of court life in which mistakes were smoothed over like wrinkles in fine silk. It's an oddly relaxing image. Human error accommodated, corrected gently, and absorbed into the larger, unhurried flow of daily life.
Royal fashion was another area of slow, obsessive attention. Monarchs often spent hours selecting garments, choosing colors, adjusting embroidery, and inspecting jewels. Marie Antoinette, famously, was deeply involved in these choices, sometimes experimenting with elaborate hairstyles that took hours to construct. Courtiers would stand silently, moving pins and adjusting wigs, while the queen murmured approval or gentle dissatisfaction. It's a quiet choreography, delicate and unhurried, producing an aesthetic spectacle without raising voices or creating undue drama. Even small obsessions with animals contributed to this hypnotic rhythm. Kings and queens frequently maintained menageries, exotic birds, or hounds that accompanied them at court. Louis XIV's dogs, for instance, were carefully groomed, trained to sit politely during ceremonies, and treated with the same meticulous attention given to minor household objects. Observing such care, centuries later, we can appreciate the gentle repetition, brushing fur, adjusting collars, ensuring proper posture. It's a minor obsession, but comforting in its persistence. And so we begin to see a pattern. Monarchs over centuries devoted themselves to minor, repetitive, oddly meticulous tasks. These might appear frivolous to outsiders, but they reveal a rhythm of life that is steady, predictable, and strangely reassuring. Every eccentricity, every obsession, every tiny domestic ritual contributed to the slow pulse of history, echoing gently through the corridors of time. We might also consider the minor psychological quirks, which, observed softly, are oddly endearing. Many rulers harbored superstitions, rituals, or fears that guided their daily actions. Charles VI of France, believing himself made of glass, or Peter the Great, obsessed with foreign customs and hygiene, demonstrate the quiet, persistent human need to impose order and safety on a world that otherwise feels unpredictable. Their eccentricities, far from alarming, provide a slow, reflective mirror of our own attempts to control tiny portions of our surroundings. And as we drift further into these centuries of gentle misadventures, it's worth noting that these eccentricities often coexist with extraordinary competence. A king may obsess over his wardrobe while leading armies. A queen may perfect her handwriting while managing an empire. An emperor may mix chemicals in jars while overseeing vast territories. There is a rhythm here that is soothing. Small, personal peculiarities layered over the slow, steady functioning of large systems. It is neither chaotic nor dramatic. It is human, persistent, and quietly miraculous. As your thoughts float through these chambers of history, picture the quiet, deliberate movements: a ruler inspecting a fountain, a courtier adjusting embroidery, a musician practicing notes endlessly, a scribe copying letters with infinite care. These are the rhythms of life at the highest levels, unhurried, repetitive, slightly absurd, yet deeply human. The elegance lies in the persistence, in the subtle continuity, in the slow unfolding of minor eccentricities alongside monumental decisions. And so, tonight, let us rest in this gentle realization. History is as much about small, persistent quirks as it is about wars, revolutions, or dramatic upheavals. Monarchs, emperors, and queens were people first, often fragile,
sometimes oddly obsessed, occasionally ridiculous, yet consistently human. Their lives provide a lullaby of eccentricity, a soft echo of imperfection, and a quiet, comforting reminder that even the most exalted humans carry their peculiarities with calm dignity.
Quiet tragedies and familial oddities in royal history. As we settle further into the soft rhythm of history, let's linger on the quieter, more melancholy corners of royal life. Places where ambition and circumstance meet fragility, producing outcomes that are more quietly sad than dramatically catastrophic. These are the minor tragedies, the slow missteps, the unintended consequences of dynastic ambition, all unfolding gently, almost imperceptibly. Take, for instance, the life of Mary, Queen of Scots, a woman born into privilege, yet her days were often filled with constraint, surveillance, and careful negotiation. From her earliest years, she was shuffled between households, tutored in multiple languages, and trained for politics with meticulous attention. Childhood for her was less about play and more about preparation for a role she scarcely chose. One can almost hear the soft whisper of advisors as she practiced protocol, the quiet murmur of family members urging caution at every turn. It's the sort of slow, persistent tension that gently hums in the background of her life, shaping every decision with quiet, inexorable pressure. Her adulthood was equally structured by circumstance. Forced marriages, political alliances, and betrayals were all part of the rhythm of her world. The slow accumulation of these pressures eventually led to her long captivity and eventual execution. There is a subtle melancholy here, a gentle reflection on how ambition and circumstance can constrain even the most intelligent and capable individuals. The rhythm of her life was not loud or violent. It was a steady, somber cadence, like the soft drip of water in a quiet chamber. Meanwhile, across Europe, similar patterns emerge. The Habsburgs, for instance, pursued dynastic purity with almost obsessive diligence. Children were married to cousins, cousins to cousins, producing fragile heirs who often struggled with illness and deformity. Charles II of Spain, whom we met earlier, suffered a lifetime of physical and mental difficulties, quietly carrying the consequences of generations of careful yet slightly misguided planning. There is a strange, hypnotic sadness in observing these repeated patterns, human ambition intertwined with unintended fragility, all unfolding in a slow, almost lulling rhythm across centuries. Even more intimate are the personal losses that often punctuated royal life. Queen Anne of England, for example, endured the deaths of numerous children, a series of quiet tragedies that shaped her entire reign. Her grief was constant, subdued, and deeply private, yet it influenced her political decisions in subtle ways. One can imagine the quiet chambers of her palace, candlelight flickering against tapestries, the gentle shuffle of attendants, and the soft echo of loss reverberating through her days. These small tragedies, repeated quietly, are a gentle reminder that privilege does not shield one from sorrow.
Then there are familial oddities that persisted across generations. The Romanovs, for example, cultivated a culture of meticulous protocol and observation, yet suffered repeated health problems due to intermarriage. Tsar Nicholas II and his family lived under constant scrutiny, their days structured by routine, etiquette, and expectation, while fragile health quietly shaped their experiences. The rhythm of their lives was slow and deliberate, yet beneath the surface, fragility and minor miscalculations accumulated, eventually producing profound consequences. It's almost calming to consider these tragedies unfolded gently, without loud explosions, in the soft cadence of generational repetition. Even minor miscalculations can ripple quietly through history. Emperor Jahangir of India, for instance, was obsessed with control and meticulous documentation, yet his indulgence in courtly rituals and personal eccentricities occasionally allowed political rivals to act unchecked. Decisions that might seem trivial, what to wear, which art to commission, how long to deliberate on a report, had subtle, long-lasting consequences. And yet these are not dramatic cliffhangers. They are small, persistent echoes of human imperfection, moving slowly through time like the gentle flow of a river. There is also a certain rhythm in the daily frustrations of court life. Courtiers navigated endless etiquette, prepared elaborate gifts, and quietly observed the moods of their rulers. A slight misstep, an incorrectly folded robe, a misplaced jewel could produce minor corrections, whispered warnings, or soft admonitions. None of it demanded loud drama, just patience, observation, and a gentle, ongoing attention to detail. Observing this rhythm is strangely soothing. The world moves, people act, and small errors are absorbed quietly into the pattern of life. And of course there were small, oddly touching attempts to create comfort amidst these pressures. Royals often surrounded themselves with pets, personal hobbies, and private rituals. Marie Antoinette famously cultivated a little village within the gardens of Versailles, a miniature pastoral retreat where she could escape courtly demands. It's a gentle, deliberate indulgence, a slow and quiet way of finding solace amid enormous responsibility. Similarly, emperors and kings often collected curiosities, exotic birds, unusual plants, rare books, not for grandeur, but for personal calm. These small obsessions, almost ritualistic in nature, produced a gentle, repetitive rhythm that helped sustain fragile lives under enormous expectations. Even minor eccentricities in dress or behavior could be soothing in their regularity. A king insisting on a particular hat, a queen arranging her tableware with obsessive care, a prince pacing exactly 3 steps before entering a room. All of these repeated, predictable quirks create a subtle, hypnotic rhythm. Observed from afar, they are not absurdities to mock. They are gentle markers of humanity, small patterns that persist through time, quietly reassuring in their predictability. And so, as we drift through these soft histories, it becomes clear that the essence of royal life is less about spectacle or heroism, and more about repetition, fragility, and gentle eccentricity. Ambition, privilege, and power coexist with minor tragedies, private fears, and oddly comforting routines. The grand events of history are underscored by small, persistent hums, the careful measurement of space, the meticulous alignment of objects, the gentle rhythm of personal obsession. These patterns, slow and deliberate, echo through time in a way that is strangely calming. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind slows, imagine the quiet chambers of palaces across centuries. A ruler tiptoeing to avoid imagined harm, a queen arranging her ornaments, a child carefully practicing protocol under watchful eyes, a courtier adjusting an intricate robe. The human pulse continues, subtle and steady, even beneath the weight of dynasties and empires. The rhythm of life persists quietly, soothingly, like the gentle flow of a river through ancient lands. And as we drift toward sleep, let us carry this soft reflection. History's great figures, for all their power, wealth, and influence, were quietly human, fragile, peculiar, and persistent. Their lives were filled with minor failures, eccentric obsessions, gentle miscalculations, and subdued tragedies. Observing them calmly allows us to appreciate the subtle, enduring patterns of human life. It reminds us that imperfection is universal, and that even those who seem exalted move through the world with small, patient steps.
Strange palaces, leisure pursuits, and the gentle obsessions of elites. As our thoughts continue to drift through history, let's linger on the quieter peculiarities of royal and elite life, those long, slow undertakings that might seem extravagant, pointless, or bizarre from a distance, but reveal something profoundly human when observed gently. The construction of palaces, the pursuit of hobbies, and the repetitive rhythms of daily routines all serve as subtle reminders that history is rarely sudden. It unfolds gradually, patiently, almost like a slow river reshaping the landscape. Take, for instance, Versailles. Louis XIV's palace is a monument not only to power, but to persistence, obsession, and the slow accumulation of detail. Every hallway, every mirror, every meticulously carved cornice reflects a ruler's insistence on control, elegance, and, perhaps, personal satisfaction. Workers labored for decades, moving stone, painting ceilings, arranging gardens in near-perfect symmetry. And yet, the Sun King himself often moved slowly through these corridors, inspecting details, adjusting arrangements, and occasionally sighing over the misalignment of a single chair. Imagine the gentle cadence of activity, footsteps echoing softly, faint scraping of tools, the whisper of robes brushing along polished floors. There is almost a lullaby-like quality to such dedicated, repetitive work. Similarly, Catherine the Great's palaces in Russia reflect a delicate balance of personal taste and political ambition. She rearranged interiors, commissioned paintings, and curated vast libraries, often in painstaking detail. In doing so, she transformed spaces into personal sanctuaries, gentle havens from courtly pressure. We can picture her walking slowly through her halls, inspecting the placement of each book and painting, while attendants quietly move furniture or adjust lighting. It's a pattern of behavior that is neither chaotic nor dramatic, but soothing in its persistence. A ruler creating order, slowly, deliberately, in a world that might otherwise feel overwhelming. Leisure pursuits were another arena for quiet obsession. Monarchs frequently engaged in hobbies that, on the surface, seemed trivial, yet shaped the daily rhythm of their lives. Louis XIV, for example, enjoyed music, dance, and theater, performing himself or commissioning elaborate productions. These artistic endeavors were not mere entertainment. They were exercises in patience, repetition, and control. Imagine the gentle scraping of violins, the soft shuffle of dancers' feet, the faint murmur of courtiers observing in respectful silence. History here moves slowly, almost meditatively, guided by rhythm and attention to detail rather than sudden drama. Other rulers found calm in collecting curiosities. Rudolph II's fascination with alchemy, mentioned earlier, was mirrored in many courts across Europe. Cabinets of curiosities filled with shells, minerals, mechanical devices, and exotic objects provided quiet engagement. Courtiers and scholars would spend hours arranging, observing, and cataloging, creating an almost hypnotic, ritualistic pattern. There is something soothing in imagining these collections, objects slowly moved, dusted, inspected, admired, and replaced in exact order, all within rooms illuminated by gentle sunlight or candlelight. Architecture itself could also be a prolonged, oddly meditative obsession. Tsar Peter the Great, in addition to his canal projects, redesigned entire cities to reflect his vision of modernity. Streets were straightened, canals realigned, and bridges adjusted to precise specifications. The work was slow, meticulous, and repetitive, yet profoundly human. There is a rhythm to these large-scale projects: measurement, adjustment, oversight, repeated endlessly, day after day. It is not dramatic, it is not loud, but it is persistent, almost hypnotically so. Even outdoor spaces became areas of careful, deliberate attention. Gardens were curated not only for beauty, but for routine. Frederick the Great of Prussia, for instance, walked his gardens daily, observing plant placement, pruning, and symmetry with obsessive care. These actions produced a quiet, almost ceremonial rhythm. Courtiers and gardeners moved with soft, unobtrusive coordination, ensuring that the natural world reflected the order and taste of the monarch. The world outside becomes an extension of human patience, a counterpoint to the chaos of life beyond the palace gates. Animals, too, played a subtle role in the rhythm of elite life. Monarchs often surrounded themselves with exotic pets, dogs trained to behave impeccably, or birds that required constant attention. Louis XIV's dogs, as mentioned before, participated in court ceremonies, moving slowly and deliberately under observation. In Japan, emperors maintained falcons, herons, and small mammals, each cared for with meticulous attention. The movement of animals through palace spaces added another layer to the quiet rhythm of court life. Brushing, feeding, adjusting, observing, all unfolding at a calm, deliberate pace. And leisure often intersected with learning. Monarchs frequently engaged in intellectual pursuits, reading, correspondence, philosophical debate. Queen Victoria maintained extensive letters and journals. Peter the Great experimented with shipbuilding and engineering. Catherine the Great corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot. These activities required focus, patience, and reflection, producing a slow, deliberate pattern of life that stands in gentle contrast to the chaos we sometimes imagine in history. The rhythm is steady: thought, observation, correction, repetition. There is nothing rushed, nothing abrupt, just the quiet unfolding of daily human engagement with knowledge, art, and order. We might also consider ceremonial routines, which were both trivial and hypnotic. Monarchs rose, dressed, and dined according to precise schedules, often performing the same gestures repeatedly with minor variations dictated by fashion, protocol, or whim. Louis XIV's daily routine was followed closely by courtiers who adjusted furniture, arranged clothes, and ensured proper posture. The ceremony itself was a slow-moving, living clock, producing a steady rhythm through the palace that is oddly soothing to imagine centuries later. Even minor miscalculations or peculiar preferences became part of this quiet pattern. Frederick the Great sometimes misjudged distances in his gardens. Catherine the Great occasionally over-ordered books or artworks. Peter the Great occasionally misaligned a canal. These errors were small, absorbed into daily life and corrected with patience. There is a gentle reassurance in observing this. Even extraordinary people make minor mistakes, and life continues quietly, persistently, rhythmically. And so, as we drift through the slow currents of history, we see a pattern emerge. Monarchs and elites often devoted themselves to minor obsessions, repetitive tasks, and subtle rituals. These actions are not dramatic. They do not explode in battles or revolutions, but they shape life, space, and culture in enduring ways. There is calm in this persistence, comfort in the continuity, and a quiet fascination in the gentle eccentricities of power. Tonight, as your thoughts settle and your body relaxes, picture the soft unfolding of these routines: a ruler inspecting a garden, a courtier adjusting a robe, a musician tuning an instrument, a scribe arranging letters, a pet quietly attending to its duties. Time moves slowly, deliberately, and rhythmically. History is not only made in grand battles and upheavals, it is made in the small, persistent, quietly obsessive actions that ripple gently through generations. And as we let our minds drift softly along these slow-moving currents, we can carry with us the comforting knowledge that even those with immense power are bound by rhythm, repetition, and human peculiarities. The world is vast. Dynasties rise and fall, and yet within the chambers of palaces and courts, life proceeds with the gentle, hypnotic cadence of patience, curiosity, and small, enduring obsessions.
Intimate habits, minor missteps, and gentle domestic conflicts. As our thoughts meander further through the soft corridors of history, let's pause to consider the quiet rhythms of personal life within royal households. Even those with immense power often lived under rules, habits, and small frustrations that shaped their days in subtle but persistent ways. These are the small dramas, the minor mistakes, and the domestic quirks that, when observed from a distance, are strangely soothing in their predictability. Take, for instance, the personal hygiene habits of monarchs. Peter the Great, whom we've visited before, insisted on cleanliness in certain aspects of life, yet often followed unusual routines, frequently washing in cold water or experimenting with new bathing techniques. In contrast, other rulers preferred elaborate perfumes to mask infrequent bathing. Imagine the gentle shuffle of attendants, the soft rustle of robes, the quiet adjustment of towels or scented cloths, all unfolding slowly, carefully, with patience and discretion. The rhythm is repetitive, precise, and oddly calming. Closely tied to personal habits are dietary routines. Monarchs often observed strict eating rituals, sometimes dictated by superstition or personal preference. Louis XIV, for example, ate meals at precise times, with dishes arranged meticulously. Henry III of France preferred foods of particular colors, sometimes refusing to consume anything that did not match his specifications. Observing the quiet preparation of these meals, the soft clatter of utensils, and the gentle movement of servants is like watching a slow, deliberate dance, one that is comforting in its steadiness and predictability. Even sleeping arrangements could be a source of ritualized routine.
Queen Elizabeth I, for instance, followed strict protocols for bedtime, surrounded by attendants who ensured every step of undressing, covering, and positioning was performed according to her wishes. Imagine the hush of the chamber, the soft whisper of curtains, the faint rustle of silks. It's a domestic choreography carried out over and over, producing a subtle rhythm that governed the most intimate aspects of life. Beyond habits, minor missteps often produced quietly amusing consequences. Monarchs misjudging distances in their gardens, incorrectly seating courtiers, or miscalculating ceremonial protocol were all part of daily life. These errors rarely produced dramatic chaos. Instead, they were absorbed into the gentle flow of courtly routine. Advisors quietly corrected mistakes, attendants adjusted furniture or clothing, and life continued in a slow, steady rhythm. Observing this from centuries later, there is something hypnotically satisfying about the predictability of human error. Familial conflicts, too, unfolded with subtle, persistent tension. Royal siblings often competed for attention, inheritance, or influence. Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra VII, as we mentioned earlier, illustrate this perfectly. Their sibling rivalry mixed with political necessity, producing a slow, ongoing drama that shaped the entire Egyptian court. There were letters exchanged, whispered counsel, and carefully measured public appearances, all orchestrated with gentle care, like a softly timed symphony of human ambition. Even small eccentricities contributed to the rhythm of domestic life. Tsar Paul I of Russia, for instance, had precise preferences for how furniture was arranged, and even how the court should walk or turn when entering rooms. Minor deviations prompted quiet corrections rather than public outrage. The pattern of daily life, attendants adjusting chairs, courtiers aligning themselves according to protocol, a ruler observing it all with measured intensity, produces a hypnotic sense of order and persistence. Leisure pursuits within the household were often slow, deliberate, and comforting. Chess, music, embroidery, and letter writing occupied hours, allowing rulers and courtiers alike to focus on small, absorbing tasks. Catherine the Great's correspondence, for example, involved careful choice of words, meticulous phrasing, and repeated inspection of tone. The rhythm is soft, repetitive, and reassuring, reminding us that even powerful figures devote time to quiet, deliberate activity, far removed from the notion of constant drama. And pets, of course, continued to play their gentle role in domestic life. Kings and queens often surrounded themselves with dogs, cats, birds, or exotic animals, all cared for with obsessive attention. Louis XIV's hounds participated in formal events, moving carefully in line with courtly expectations. Imagine the soft padding of paws, the quiet rustle of animal movement, the gentle adjustment of collars and leashes, all contributing to a rhythm of domestic life that is surprisingly meditative. Even minor domestic errors, spilled ink, misplaced letters, misaligned ornaments, were absorbed into courtly routines. Courtiers quietly corrected the issues, rulers observed, and life proceeded steadily. There is something calming about this repetition, the small persistence of human care amidst potential disorder. It is neither alarming nor overly dramatic. It is simply life unfolding at its natural, deliberate pace. Sleep, of course, was not exempt from ritual. Monarchs often had attendants present at all hours, adjusting curtains, ensuring warmth, or maintaining silence. Imagine the quiet rooms, soft candlelight flickering across walls, gentle breathing filling the air, attendants moving unobtrusively as their charge rests. The rhythm of night in royal households is almost like a lullaby, a repetitive, comforting pattern that echoes across centuries. And so, as we drift through these chambers of history, it becomes clear that the essence of domestic life among elites is rhythm, repetition, and gentle control. Small mistakes are absorbed quietly, habits create calming routines, and minor eccentricities produce subtle patterns that echo softly through time. The grand narratives of power and ambition are accompanied by these quiet, persistent undercurrents, producing a history that is not loud or frantic, but soothing, deliberate, and human. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind settles, picture the soft, slow choreography of domestic life. A ruler arranging papers, a courtier straightening a robe, a pet quietly observing, a musician tuning strings, an attendant adjusting curtains. Time moves slowly, deliberately, and consistently. History in this quiet form becomes almost meditative, a gentle rhythm of human habits, minor errors, and enduring curiosity. And as we let our minds drift, it is comforting to remember, even the most powerful and exalted figures in history are quietly human. Their lives are marked by subtle patterns, gentle eccentricities, and small domestic dramas that unfold patiently, without urgency. The rhythm of their existence is slow, persistent, and oddly hypnotic, an enduring echo of humanity's quiet persistence through the centuries.
Gentle political missteps, minor scandals, and ceremonial absurdities. As we continue our gentle journey through the corridors of history, let's pause to consider the quieter side of politics, the minor errors, small scandals, and oddly ritualized absurdities that shaped royal life without requiring dramatic upheaval. These are the slow ripples of human imperfection, the subtle undercurrents of decision-making, and the lightly humorous misadventures that accompany power when observed from a calm, reflective distance. Take, for example, King George IV of England. Known for his indulgent lifestyle, he often mismanaged courtly funds and royal etiquette, producing quietly frustrating situations for his advisors. His love of lavish clothing and elaborate balls, combined with a penchant for debt, meant that the rhythm of his reign was punctuated by soft murmurs of concern, the discreet movement of ledgers, and the quiet adjustment of courtly arrangements. There were no sudden explosions of drama, just a steady, persistent undercurrent of miscalculation absorbed gently by a patient bureaucracy. Meanwhile, across France, the court of Louis XV had its share of ceremonial absurdities. Certain rituals, like the lever and coucher, the ceremonial waking and sleeping of the king, required courtiers to observe, assist, and perform according to exacting rules. One can imagine the soft rustle of robes, the faint clinking of jewelry, the slow, deliberate movements of attendants as they assisted the king through his day. These rituals might seem trivial or even absurd, yet they created a hypnotic rhythm, a gentle cadence that structured life within the palace. Minor scandals, too, often played out in slow motion. Courtly gossip, romantic entanglements, and carefully hidden indiscretions accumulated gradually, observed discreetly by attendants and advisors. Marie Antoinette's rumored dalliances, for example, generated quiet intrigue long before they reached public notice. Courtiers exchanged subtle glances, letters were passed carefully, and the court's machinery hummed along without interruption. The unfolding of scandal in this measured way is oddly soothing, almost like watching a slowly turning clock.
The hands move, patterns shift, but time itself remains steady and unhurried. Political miscalculations also produced minor, persistent ripples. Emperor Charles VI of the Holy Roman Empire, obsessed with the pragmatic sanction, spent decades ensuring his daughter could inherit the throne. His meticulous legal maneuvering often ignored subtle social realities and rivalries, leading to quiet complications later on. There were no dramatic explosions of failure in the moment. Instead, small tensions accumulated patiently, eventually manifesting in succession disputes. Observing these slow effects reminds us that even the most careful planning cannot entirely escape the gentle unpredictability of human life. In Japan, the Edo period's shoguns carefully orchestrated ceremony, hierarchy, and domestic ritual. Small breaches of etiquette, such as improper seating or misaligned offerings, required quiet correction rather than dramatic confrontation. Imagine the soft shuffle of tatami mats, the gentle movement of attendants, and the ruler's calm, deliberate observation, all creating a slow, meditative rhythm that sustained courtly life. Even mistakes, minor as they were, became part of a subtle, continuous pattern that structured existence. In Russia, Peter the Great faced the dual challenge of modernizing his empire while managing tradition-bound courtiers. Small errors in protocol, misjudged social cues, or slightly misplaced priorities were corrected quietly with gentle admonitions or patient explanation. The emperor's meticulous attention to detail produced a rhythm of minor adjustments, repeated endlessly, a slow choreography of control that, when observed centuries later, becomes almost hypnotic in its precision. Even in matters of diplomacy, minor missteps accumulated slowly. Correspondence, treaties, and ceremonial gift exchanges often required careful timing and precise etiquette. A misdelivered letter, a delayed response, or an incorrectly folded document might produce minor tensions absorbed with quiet patience by advisors and courtiers. Over time, these gentle ripples could shift alliances or influence decisions, but never with sudden dramatic force, only as a series of measured, persistent effects. Ceremonial absurdities were another source of quiet fascination. Consider the royal touch, a ritual in which kings of France and England were believed to cure illness by physical contact. Entire assemblies of courtiers, clergy, and supplicants would move slowly according to prescribed rules. The rhythm of these ceremonies, kneeling, bowing, hand placement, unfolded deliberately, producing a subtle, hypnotic pattern. Success or failure of the ritual mattered less than the ongoing, steady choreography of participation. Even personal habits could influence political life in small, persistent ways. Catherine the Great's meticulous letter writing, Louis XIV's strict daily routines, and Frederick the Great's obsession with music all intersected with governance. Decisions were made within these slow-moving frameworks of personal obsession, creating a history where policy and eccentricity coexist in gentle, predictable rhythm. The minor missteps, the overlooked letter, a delayed response, an overindulgent musical performance become quietly absorbing elements of historical narrative. And, of course, gossip and rumor wove themselves gently through these courts. Courtiers whispered, alliances conferred quietly, and small intrigues unfolded over months or years rather than days. The slow rhythm of observation, minor correction, and subtle negotiation defines much of royal life. A continuous, hypnotic flow of attention, careful action, and human imperfection. It is a pattern that is strangely calming when considered softly, removed from the intensity of dramatic retellings. And as you drift further, consider the gentle repetition of ceremonial life. Attendants adjusting garments, courtiers bowing with measured grace, letters being written and rewritten, gardens tended with slow diligence, minor errors quietly corrected. Even minor scandals, secret love letters, whispered disputes, ceremonial faux pas fit into this pattern. They create gentle ripples in the otherwise steady flow of life, not breaking it, but adding texture. The world continues slowly, patiently, with human curiosity, ambition, and imperfection, weaving a quiet tapestry across time. And so tonight, as your thoughts wander gently along these soft currents of history, imagine the subtle choreography of life: a king receiving a letter, a queen adjusting an elaborate gown, an attendant whispering quietly in the ear of a ruler, a small domestic misstep quietly corrected. Time moves slowly, steadily, persistently. The human pulse continues beneath wealth, power, and ceremony, producing a rhythm that is soothing, continuous, and hypnotically calm. History at its quietest is not loud, not abrupt, not shocking. It is the gentle unfolding of human habits, minor mistakes, ceremonial precision, and small enduring eccentricities. And as your eyes grow heavy and your mind drifts, you can carry with you the calm knowledge that even the most exalted figures are quietly human, moving through life with deliberate steps, patient correction, and softly persistent patterns that echo through the centuries.
Fragile airs, domestic power struggles, and quietly dark eccentricities. As we continue our slow stroll through history, it's worth pausing in the quieter shadows of dynasties. These are spaces where fragile airs, subtle rivalries, and minor miscalculations shaped lives in ways that were more quietly tragic than dramatically explosive. There is a calm fascination in watching the soft persistence of human imperfection in spaces that seem, from the outside, overwhelmingly controlled. Consider the Habsburgs, a family whose devotion to dynastic continuity produced both stunning influence and recurring fragility. Children were often born with health problems, intellectual challenges, or subtle deformities, consequences of generations of careful, well-intentioned intermarriage. Charles II of Spain, for instance, carried the weight of these familial choices, his life slow, fragile, and marked with quiet struggle. There was something almost hypnotic in the gentle repetition. One generation after another, similar patterns quietly emerge, shaping the rhythm of life with patient inevitability. The domestic power struggles in these households were equally absorbing in their subtlety. Courtiers, siblings, and advisors all moved in quiet, deliberate patterns of influence. One can imagine whispered conversations in softly lit chambers, carefully measured gestures, and small adjustments to seating, decor, or ceremonial positioning. There is no loud drama here, only the persistent, understated hum of human ambition, filtered through generations of careful observation. Fragile airs often inspired both devotion and anxiety. Louis XIV, for example, experienced the early deaths of multiple children, a gentle sorrow that shaped both his personal life
and his attention to succession. Similarly, Queen Anne of England lost many of her offspring, each quiet tragedy leaving subtle echoes in the decisions she made, the courtiers she favored, and the policies she enacted. These patterns of loss and concern are slow-moving, yet their impact quietly shapes dynasties for decades. Eccentricity in later dynasties also takes a more subdued, quietly unsettling form. Tsar Paul I of Russia, with his obsession over military precision and domestic order, maintained a household ruled by meticulous protocol. Mistakes, improper dress, misplaced furniture, incorrectly aligned guards, elicited subtle but persistent correction. The rhythm of life was hypnotically strict, producing a slow tension that persisted quietly, shaping behavior and expectation across the court. It's a kind of domestic rhythm that is oddly mesmerizing when imagined centuries later, slow, deliberate, and full of soft insistence. Even minor rivalries between siblings could stretch into decades, producing gentle, ongoing tension rather than dramatic upheaval. The Ptolemies, for instance, demonstrated sibling competition and cooperation in equal measure. Cleopatra VII and her brother Ptolemy XIII navigated a careful dance of power, personal rivalry, and strategic alliance. Letters, council, and ceremonial appearances were all instruments in a subtle, persistent choreography of influence, an almost hypnotic dance of family politics that could be observed without rush or dramatics. Fragile health among heirs also created a peculiar rhythm of care and caution. Courtiers monitored diets, exercise, and daily routines with near obsessive diligence. Medications, baths, and carefully timed activities produced a gentle, repetitive cadence in the household. Even minor illnesses triggered delicate adjustments, a soft change in schedule, a quiet rearrangement of rooms, a whispered instruction to an attendant. The rhythm of fragility is subtle, persistent, and strangely calming when imagined as part of a centuries-long pattern. Beyond health, minor eccentricities in personality could dominate domestic life. Louis XVI, for instance, was known for his gentle and indecisive nature, which coexisted with the rigid demands of courtly ceremony. Courtiers adjusted to his hesitations and small errors with patience, creating a slow, enduring rhythm of accommodation. There is a meditative quality in this. The court moves quietly, patiently, absorbing human imperfection into an otherwise formal structure. Even ceremonial miscalculations can produce long, quiet echoes. A misplaced chair, a misaligned procession, or a slightly late arrival could ripple gently through courtly schedules, producing minor adjustments that became part of daily life. These patterns are not shocking. They are subtle, continuous, and oddly hypnotic, a soft undercurrent to the outward display of grandeur. Family intrigue, though not rarely violent in daily life, also adds to the gentle complexity. Advisors whispered, siblings maneuvered quietly, and parents exercised slow, persistent influence over children. Courtiers observed, minor corrections were implemented, and life proceeded steadily. The interplay of human ambition, domestic routine, and familial expectation produces a soft, persistent rhythm, slow, absorbing, and oddly meditative. Even small indulgences, collections of books, paintings, or curiosities fit into this pattern. They are personal obsessions that allow rulers and heirs to shape a private rhythm within the household, a quiet counterpoint to political or ceremonial demands. Catherine the Great, Peter the Great, and other rulers maintained these subtle practices, producing small, repetitive actions that echo through history like a gentle, ongoing pulse. And of course, pets, music, and private rituals continued to shape the household's tempo. Birds in cages, dogs trained for ceremony, and quiet music performed in private rooms all contribute to a layered rhythm of life. It is neither loud nor abrupt, but persistent and steady. Small movements, repeated patterns, quiet observation, slow adaptation. This is history in its softest, most hypnotic form. Tonight, as your thoughts wander through these fragile dynasties, imagine the soft choreography of household life. A nurse adjusting a child's blanket, a courtier rearranging a chair, a sibling moving carefully through a corridor, a ruler quietly observing. The gentle pulse of human imperfection, eccentricity, and persistence continues, slow and steady. History in this form is soothing, a reminder that power coexists with fragility, that ambition coexists with eccentricity, and that life, even at its most exalted, moves with patient persistence. And as you drift toward sleep, let the quiet realization settle. Even in the shadows of dynasties, amid fragile airs and domestic power struggles, life unfolds with calm, gentle rhythm. There is persistence, there is human curiosity, and there is the soft, enduring music of subtle imperfection that resonates across centuries, lulling us gently into reflection, rest, and calm.
Ceremonial extravagances, odd hobbies, and courtly absurdities. As we continue our slow stroll through history, let's linger on the ceremonial and the slightly absurd. These are the quiet, repetitive patterns of court life that were often extravagant, occasionally bizarre, and consistently human. They unfolded with patience and attention, a gentle rhythm of habit, performance, and minor indulgence that continues to fascinate across centuries. Consider the ceremonial splendor of Louis XIV's court. Beyond the grand halls of Versailles, every meal, every greeting, and every gesture followed precise rules. Courtiers bowed, knelt, and adjusted garments in small, measured motions, producing a continuous rhythm that was as hypnotic as it was meticulous. The lever and coucher, the king's ceremonial waking and sleeping, were exercises in patience and observation, repeated daily, quietly reinforcing hierarchy and expectation. There is a subtle poetry in this repetition. Minor errors were corrected gently, small adjustments made with care, and life flowed steadily, predictably, almost meditatively. Odd hobbies often complemented these rituals. Monarchs frequently engaged in activities that were trivial, eccentric, or obsessively detailed. Frederick the Great of Prussia cultivated a fascination with music, composing works and performing for small audiences. Peter the Great experimented with shipbuilding and engineering projects, sometimes personally adjusting tools or mechanisms. These pursuits were slow, absorbing, and oddly comforting in their persistence. One can imagine the soft scraping of a bow across strings, the faint clink of metal tools, or the gentle murmur of a ruler speaking instructions, sounds that create a quiet rhythm across the household. Even minor extravagances in decoration contributed to the hypnotic cadence of court life. Catherine the Great meticulously curated her palaces, arranging paintings, sculptures, and furniture with careful attention. A misplaced vase, a slightly misaligned painting, or a crooked piece of furniture required subtle correction. Courtiers moved quietly, adjusting and observing, producing a soft, continuous pattern of care and repetition that became the pulse of domestic life. Hunting, a popular pastime among many monarchs, was another source of gentle ritual. Kings and nobles prepared equipment, organized small armies of attendants, and followed slow, deliberate patterns through forests and fields. Even mistakes, lost horses, misplaced maps, or minor delays were quietly accommodated, absorbed into the rhythm of the activity.
There is something calming about this, a reminder that even grand pursuits unfold at a slow, human pace shaped by preparation, habit, and persistence. Courtly fashions added another layer of hypnotic absurdity. Elaborate wigs, towering hats, and intricate gowns required hours of adjustment, minor corrections, and patient observation. Courtiers moved silently, attending to pins, lace, and jewelry, while the monarch observed with careful attention. Small errors, a crooked ribbon, a misplaced brooch, elicited gentle correction rather than dramatic outburst, contributing to the ongoing rhythm of life in the palace. Music and performance were similarly immersive and quietly obsessive. Composers, musicians, and dancers practiced endlessly for courtly presentations, often under the ruler's direct observation. The repeated, patient nature of rehearsal produced a subtle cadence, notes tuned, steps repeated, gestures refined, until all aligned in gentle harmony. Observing this centuries later, one can almost hear the soft music, the gentle footsteps, the quiet murmur of approval or correction, a lullaby of disciplined human creativity. Even religious and ceremonial rituals, performed daily or seasonally, contributed to this rhythm. Kings and queens attended Mass, recited prayers, and observed fasts with meticulous attention. Courtiers and attendants followed subtle protocols, moving quietly and precisely to ensure the proper unfolding of events. Minor errors were adjusted with care. A misaligned candle, a slightly off posture, or a whispered reminder. The slow, deliberate flow of these actions is hypnotically calming, producing a steady cadence that repeats across generations. Minor scandals often intersected with these patterns, but in gentle, absorbing ways. Romantic intrigues, petty rivalries, and minor indiscretions unfolded quietly, carefully observed by attendants and advisors. Letters were written, gifts exchanged, and positions subtly shifted. There was no dramatic eruption. Instead, tension accumulated and resolved in a soft, persistent rhythm, like a tide moving slowly across a shore. It is this gentle accumulation, rather than abrupt drama, that makes courtly scandal quietly fascinating. Even children of the royals participated in these rhythms. Young princes and princesses were trained in etiquette, ritual, and minor hobbies, repeating gestures, practicing music, and observing protocol with patient diligence. Mistakes were corrected gently, progress noted subtly, and the cycle continued steadily. The rhythm of upbringing mirrors the larger cadence of court life, persistent, deliberate, and quietly absorbing. Even pets remained an integral part of the pattern. Dogs, birds, and exotic animals were cared for meticulously, trained for decorum, or simply observed in gentle fascination. Louis XIV's dogs, Catherine the Great's falcons, or the exotic monkeys of various European courts all contributed to a quiet domestic melody, producing small, repeated movements that harmonized with the larger rhythm of palace life. And so, as we drift further into these soft patterns, it is clear that courtly life, even at its most extravagant or absurd, is dominated by repetition, patience, and careful observation. Ceremonies, hobbies, fashion, music, and minor scandals create a layered rhythm that is strangely hypnotic. The small, repeated gestures of humans, corrected, adjusted, refined, produce a gentle pulse that carries through centuries. Tonight, as your mind relaxes and your body settles, imagine the palace alive with these slow rhythms, a musician tuning strings, a courtier adjusting a gown, a ruler observing, a pet moving quietly through a hall, a ceremony unfolding with patient precision. Time flows steadily, gently, and persistently. History in this form is soothing, a continuous unfolding of human curiosity, indulgence, and carefully managed eccentricity. Even amid extravagance, absurdity, or minor scandal, the pulse remains calm, predictable, and quietly absorbing. The steady patterns of human behavior, ritual, habit, correction, and repetition carry a gentle reassurance. Power exists alongside eccentricity, drudgery alongside patience, and ritual alongside curiosity. The small, persistent details of court life form a lullaby, soft and enduring, echoing through time.
Personal foibles, minor domestic disasters, and human quirks. As we move gently through history, it's comforting to pause on the small human imperfections that define even the most exalted lives. These are not grand tragedies, but minor foibles, domestic mishaps, and subtle quirks that ripple quietly through palaces and courts. They offer a gentle rhythm to history, a sense of familiarity across centuries, and a soft reminder that power does not preclude eccentricity or occasional error. Consider King George III of England. He was devoted, conscientious, and deeply concerned with the well-being of his household. Yet he suffered periodic bouts of mental illness, producing small disruptions in courtly routine. Courtiers learned to anticipate his moods, adjusting schedules and seating arrangements with care. The minor domestic disasters caused by sudden changes in temperament were absorbed quietly. Letters delayed, meals adjusted, ceremonial routines modified. There was no chaos, only the steady, patient accommodation of human frailty. Even more mundane quirks shaped daily life. Catherine the Great, as we have noted, meticulously inspected her palaces and possessions. Items out of place, curtains slightly uneven, or chairs misaligned demanded gentle correction. Courtiers and attendants moved softly to accommodate her preferences, creating a persistent, hypnotic rhythm of minor adjustments. The repetition of these small acts produces a quiet melody, a steady pattern that resonates with patience and attentiveness. Pets often contributed to domestic unpredictability. Monarchs frequently had dogs, cats, or birds moving through carefully arranged halls. A dog barking at an inappropriate moment, a bird refusing to perform its routine, or a monkey knocking over an ornament would create tiny ripples, quickly absorbed into the rhythm of household life. These minor disruptions were neither alarming nor dramatic, only quietly amusing and gently correcting themselves over time. Minor disasters also occurred in kitchens, gardens, and libraries. Meals occasionally burned or spoiled. Rare books were misplaced. Gardens grew slightly out of alignment with plans. Attendants moved deliberately to correct these minor errors, restoring order without urgency. The result is a gentle, repetitive pattern: disruption, observation, adjustment, continuation. History, in its slowest form, is remarkably soothing when considered this way. Human quirks, too, added texture to daily life. Louis XIV's obsession with personal appearance meant that robes, wigs, and shoes were checked obsessively. Peter the Great sometimes wandered through his palaces in unusual attire, inspecting rooms at unexpected hours. Frederick the Great had precise routines for music and correspondence. These quirks, repeated daily or weekly, produced a hypnotic cadence, a rhythm of life that quietly structured human behavior. Even in governance,
Small errors and indecisions unfolded in a slow, absorbing pattern. Kings and queens made minor miscalculations, issued slightly ambiguous decrees, or misjudged ceremonial timings. Advisors and courtiers patiently absorbed these subtleties, correcting, adjusting, and guiding decisions with care. The outcome is not drama, but a gentle unfolding of human imperfection across time, a reminder that even rulers are, at heart, participants in a slow, ongoing negotiation with life's unpredictability. Courtly gossip, minor rivalries, and personal eccentricities intertwined softly with these routines. A sibling's quiet jealousy, a servant's unnoticed mistake, or a minor scandal in correspondence moved gently through the household. There was no eruption, only subtle adjustment, whispered corrections, discreet arrangements, patient observation. The rhythm of life in these households is slow, absorbing, and hypnotically calm, a continuous pulse of small human interactions. Children of monarchs were not exempt from these patterns. Young princes and princesses were trained in etiquette, daily routines, and hobbies with persistent patience. Missteps, dropping a utensil, misreading a letter, or performing a dance step incorrectly, were gently corrected. Life for these children unfolded in measured repetitions, soft guidance, and persistent oversight. Their experiences reflect a broader rhythm, one of continuity, adjustment, and calm endurance. Even minor eccentricities, unusual clothing choices, peculiar eating habits, or obsessive attention to detail produced a quietly absorbing spectacle. Courtiers, attendants, and family members accommodated these behaviors, creating patterns that persisted across decades. These small rituals, repeated endlessly, are oddly comforting to imagine. A ruler carefully adjusting a quill, an attendant realigning a chair, a pet wandering quietly through a hall, a child carefully practicing etiquette, a minor mishap quietly corrected. Time flows steadily, deliberately, persistently. History, when observed in these gentle rhythms, is soothing, a lullaby of human curiosity, imperfection, and enduring persistence that echoes softly across centuries. And even amid foibles, small domestic disasters, and eccentricities, there is a hypnotic calm. The pulse of human life continues, patient, deliberate, and quietly structured by habit, ritual, and gentle correction. And as we drift toward rest, we can carry this soft reassurance. History is not only the loud moments of triumph and tragedy, but the steady, enduring rhythm of life's small human details, perfectly suited for quiet reflection, gentle meditation, and calm, uninterrupted sleep. Enduring eccentricities, subtle failures, and the gentle patterns of history. As we approach the quieter end of our historical journey tonight, let's linger on the persistent, subtle qualities that define the lives of elites across centuries. These are the eccentricities that endure, the minor failures that accumulate, and the gentle patterns of repetition that quietly structure human life. Observing these elements from a distance, one can feel the soft pulse of history itself, steady, calm, and hypnotically absorbing. Consider once more the personal quirks of monarchs. Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, each displayed behaviors that were consistent, repetitive, and in some cases peculiar. From obsessively inspecting objects to adjusting ceremonial routines, their actions created a slow, deliberate cadence. Mistakes were minor and corrected quietly. Eccentricities were integrated into daily life. The effect is almost meditative. The rhythm of human attention, habit, and minor indulgence unfolds softly, persistently across time. Subtle failures, too, are part of this hypnotic flow. Charles II of Spain, hampered by generations of inbreeding, struggled with health and leadership. Yet life in the Habsburg court continued, quietly adapting to his limitations. Minor errors in decision-making, ceremonial missteps, or domestic accidents were absorbed and corrected by advisors, attendants, and family members. There is a quiet fascination in this gentle unfolding. History is rarely sudden. It is slow, incremental, and measured. Even the most extravagant habits of monarchs contribute to this soothing rhythm. The endless adjustment of gowns, wigs, or palace furnishings, the precise arrangement of gardens, the soft rehearsal of music or dance, all produce a gentle cadence that carries across decades. Each small act, repeated carefully, becomes part of a larger, persistent pattern that defines life in courts and palaces. Observing this from afar, we can almost hear the soft rustle of fabric, the faint clink of utensils, or the subtle murmur of conversation, all layered into a slow, hypnotic symphony of human existence. Minor domestic disasters, too, fit seamlessly into this pattern. A spilled drink, a misplaced letter, or a slightly crooked painting produces gentle correction rather than dramatic disruption. Courtiers move quietly to adjust. Children repeat lessons patiently. Pets wander through rooms with measured curiosity. Even error becomes part of the persistent rhythm of life, absorbed softly and without urgency. It is a reminder that human life, at its most ordinary and repetitive, is deeply satisfying in its predictability and continuity. Eccentricities, small, personal, sometimes amusing, continue to enrich this pattern. Tsar Paul I's obsession with precision, Louis XVI's gentle indecision, or Frederick the Great's musical compulsions all create slow-moving, absorbing rhythms. Courtiers, family members, and attendants adapt gracefully, producing a quiet interplay of human habits and expectations. The repetition, the small corrections, and the persistent attentiveness all combine into a gentle lullaby of life, rich with nuance and subtle texture. And then there are the minor intrigues and quiet rivalries. Siblings compete softly. Advisors maneuver gently, and children practice protocol with patient care. These interactions rarely erupt into sudden drama. They move like soft currents, shaping the flow of life with small, persistent nudges. The effect is hypnotically calming. The interplay of curiosity, ambition, and correction forms a steady pulse across generations. Even the most public displays, ceremonies, rituals, or official audiences are absorbed into this rhythm. Courtiers adjust movements, pets are positioned, objects are aligned, and rulers observe quietly. Each small action contributes to a broader cadence, a gentle layering of order and human attention that extends beyond any single moment. The repetition is comforting. The minor eccentricities are familiar. The slow unfolding of life is mesmerizing. Throughout history, we can see that power, wealth, and status coexist with human fragility, habit, and curiosity. Monarchs and elites, despite their grandeur, remain participants in the slow, gentle rhythms of life. Their routines, their quirks, their domestic patterns, and their subtle failures all form a continuous pulse, a hypnotic, absorbing cadence that continues across generations. It is a history that does not startle, nor does it demand urgency. Instead, it invites calm observation, soft reflection, and gentle wonder. And so, as we let our minds settle, imagine the small details of historical life: a ruler adjusting papers, an attendant aligning a chair, a child practicing etiquette, a dog moving quietly through a hall, a minor error gently corrected. Picture these patterns repeating, layer upon layer, century upon century, producing a slow, continuous rhythm. The pulse of human life, even in its most exalted forms, is steady, gentle, and mesmerizing. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, let the quiet cadence of history carry you. The lives of monarchs and elites, filled with eccentricity, minor disaster, gentle rivalry, and persistent habit, are a lullaby of human continuity. Each small gesture, each repeated action, each quiet correction contributes to a slow, hypnotic rhythm, echoing softly across the corridors of time. History, in its calmest form, is not a story of dramatic upheaval. It is the steady unfolding of human life, repeated, corrected, observed, and quietly perfected. The pulse of domestic routines, ceremonial rituals, minor scandals, eccentric habits, and persistent curiosity creates a lullaby that can soothe even the most restless mind. And as you rest tonight, imagine this gentle, enduring rhythm flowing softly through centuries, carrying you with it toward calm, uninterrupted sleep.
Soft reflections and farewell drift. As our slow passage through the lives of monarchs, courtiers, and the quietly eccentric unfolds toward its end, it is comforting to linger in reflection. We have wandered through palaces, gardens, and private chambers, observed minor mishaps, eccentric habits, and subtle domestic dramas, and listened to the gentle pulse of history itself. Now it is time to allow all these soft currents to carry us toward rest. Think for a moment of the countless small gestures that fill these lives: a courtesan adjusting a ribbon, a page carrying letters down echoing hallways, a young prince practicing a bow, an attendant quietly straightening a chair, or a dog curling beside the hearth. These gestures are tiny, yet persistent, echoing the rhythm of daily life, absorbed quietly into centuries of human activity. There is a calming poetry in imagining this gentle repetition, the subtle order that emerges from habit, correction, and attentiveness.